Hey, Pastor, doesn't science disprove the Bible?
Isn't Genesis just a fairy tale?
Is God for real? Did he really create everything in 6 literal days?
Didn't God just use the Big Bang?
Why is there death and suffering? Really believe the Bible?
Didn't man evolve from apes?
For answers to these questions and more, stand by for Believing the Bible.
Welcome to Believing the Bible. This is Scott Lane with Terry Reed, Dr. Ken Harris, Dr. Carl Williams, and our producer, Jeremiah Rosenthal, all with the San Antonio Bible-Based Science Association. We are here to reassure you can believe the Bible from the very first verse. Today, we're going to discuss the possibility of turning what some people call the God of the gaps, which is their explanation for people of faith, to evolution of the gaps, as those gaps seem to be widening and showing up all over the place. Carl, this was your idea. What kind of questions come into that?
Well, let's discuss what God of the gaps is in the first place. The evolutionists will look at the creationists and say, well, you use God to explain things you don't understand. And that's been happening all through history, just like when the god Thor was invented to explain thunder and lightning. Well, and as science came around and explained how thunder and lightning came into being, scientifically speaking, there's no longer a need for Thor. And they lump Thor into the God of the Bible as well. So we're seeing that as science progresses, the God that we believe in from the Bible is being pushed into a smaller and smaller gap of this wall of information that's being cemented together by the evolutionists. That's their claim. However, if we were to look at their information, are they really getting God out of the picture? Let's talk about biology, life. Where did life come from? And as science progresses, and this is not a God versus science, this is God versus another God, basically. Evolution is an idea, a theory, maybe, a hypothesis, probably, about how things came about. How things came from nothing and became everything we see today. Is this a logical, a scientific idea? What would you say? I mean, evolution says it's scientific. How does it even say it's scientific? How can it say it's scientific? Terry?
Well, basically, they're wanting to redefine science. Their explanation, or what they would say is, and you don't have to take my word for it, listen to what they're saying. It's something along these lines. They're basically saying science is about naturalistic explanations. A biblical creation account is a supernatural explanation. Therefore, it isn't scientific. Therefore, it didn't happen.
So by changing the definition, by focusing a definition that only allows a naturalistic explanation, by definition, God doesn't exist. Right. God can't be talked about in the classroom because we've changed the definition of science. Okay? So let's just look at evolution then. Evolution is supposed to be scientific. Now, what does pass for science? What is the scientific definition?
Well, I mean, if you think about this, right, they claim that it's science, but the scientific method is based on observation and repeatable experiments. Everything they claim about so-called evolution in deep time was not observed, is not being repeated, cannot be experimented upon today. It is not even open to the scientific method.
So it's kind of like faith.
Faith.
And when you say that, you're getting into one of the big areas where there's an evolution of the gaps. For example, they will talk for a long time about how evolution has progressed, how you have the evolutionary tree, how you have transition from one species to another, but they will never give you a straight answer because they haven't got on where the inorganic life came to be organic, where life came from non-life. They have the biggest chasm there you'll ever see.
Well, and now they even will say that's not a question for evolution, how life began.
Yeah, they beg the question.
They beg the question because they have no answer for it.
So there's a gap.
Now, in the Bible, we read in Hebrews 11:1, faith is a substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. That sounds a whole lot like evolution. If you've got to have faith to believe that evolution actually happened, because, hey, we got life, therefore, somewhere non-life became life because we see life, so therefore it had to have happened. That's faith. But is it faith in God? No. It's faith, silly idea, that there is no cause for life.
And, if you think about it, they've been quite successful in this propaganda attempt to paint belief in God as faith and then evolution as science. But they, as you point out, they're actually both faith systems. But Christianity in the scripture is based on historical reality, whereas when you look at evolution, this belief that was not observed and it can't be repeated is claimed to be fact.
And that's where we're getting to this God of the gaps versus evolution of the gaps idea. The God of the gaps is not getting smaller. In fact, the more science finds out about biology, about life, about the complexity of DNA, the complexity of just any kind of system that is organic, it becomes so apparent that it could never have started by itself. Therefore, there had to have been a prime cause. There had to have been something that started it all. What was that something? Who was that something? The Bible gives us a clear answer as to who that something is. Evolution doesn't. So therefore, the so-called God of the gaps idea is not valid. The evolution of the gaps, however, is getting worse and worse. If you imagine the God of the gaps idea is there's this brick wall, and behind every brick is the knowledge that has explained something. And they say that the ones that are not there yet are what creationists say God did it because we don't know how it happened. However, that's kind of backwards now because those bricks, if you will, are how evolution supposedly happened. And the science behind it is dissolving. And so for those bricks are crumbling and going away, making a wider and wider gap in that wall called evolution.
You are listening to Believing the Bible. This is Scott Lane with Terry Reed, Dr. Ken Harris, Dr. Carl Williams. If you would like to learn more, go to sabsa.org. That is sabbsa.org. Today we're discussing the concepts of God of the gaps versus evolution of the gaps. Carl, what led you into this?
Well, years ago, we watched a video called Flock of Dodos. In fact, this is a documentary, supposedly, of evolutionary teachers who are discouraged because at the time, this was in 2007 or thereabouts, that students in the classroom were still having a large percentage of students who didn't believe in evolution. So they were bemoaning the fact that we just can't get these kids to believe us. So we need to teach it better. Whatever we're doing is doing wrong. We're doing it wrong. Something's wrong. And this is where one of the scientists mentioned the God of the gaps idea and how that eventually evolution will win the battle because we're closing off the gaps that God exists in. The only God can explain it. Gaps are going away. Therefore, soon we will have this wall built and evolution will be a rock solid fact. But
one of the things that goes into this in terms of the evolution of gaps used to be just known fact by the evolutionary community that there was basically only about 1.5% of our genome which was functional, and that 98.5% was just pure junk. Well, then came the ENCODE project. And the ENCODE project basically has told us that at least 80% of our genome, and probably 100%, that's their statement, is totally functional. That blows up their whole theses for where all the mixing and matching and mistakes and conjuring of new information is coming from. That is a huge gap. And it's where the evolution of the gaps really gets shown.
Well, it can't be, in their view, it cannot be disproven, like as you point out, whatever comes up. And it's because it's a worldview issue. They begin with a faith that there is no God, that everything created itself. So no matter what the evidence is, they will find a way to twist it so that it, again, comes back to so-called prove evolution.
Yeah, it's not falsifiable.
Exactly.
Which shows it's not really even science at all. Yeah.
I'm going to reiterate what Terry said about DNA, because it's been looked at that the DNA is so complex, it's actually four-dimensional in how it can be read. It's kind of like a crossword puzzle that has all columns and blocks are filled in, and in each direction, whether it's upwards, downwards, sideways, or at a corner, it makes sense. That's how DNA, that's how complex and how marvelous the information is packed into the DNA of our bodies.
One of the more honest of the evolutionists who's now dead was Dr. Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard. And he recognized that when you actually look at the fossil record, and he's one of the few people who's sitting on top of the actual fossils, when he looked at it, he said there are huge gaps between every kind in terms of what are supposed to be the transitional forms. He basically said there are no transitional forms. The creationists are right on that. But what has to be is that some event occurred, whether it was astronomical or biological, something occurred every few 100 million years to make great leaps because we don't have the transitions in between.
Leaping lizards.
Leaping lizard. Now, you talk about a gap. There's a huge gap in biology. And to the point that he has not been refuted by the evolutionists, there's simply two camps now. There are the people who are the gradualists, the normal evolutionists, and then there's people like who believe in Gould and punctuated equilibria.
So no matter what, there has to be a first cause for biologic evolution. It has to have started somewhere, somehow. Now, the discoverer of DNA said, well, it came from outer space. It's so complicated. We had to have seeded from space the DNA that eventually became the nidus for all the evolution that occurred on Earth. But what is that doing? All that's doing is pushing it out further away from where we could actually observe it, test it, and prove it or disprove it. Everything in science has to have the potential for falsifiability. And if you can't falsify it, then it ain't science.
This coming Tuesday at 7 p.m. at Faith Lutheran, we will watch the video The Privileged Planet, showing how God specially formed this planet, solar system, and universe for us. You're invited to join us for this special evening, Tuesday, October 14 at 7 p.m. at Faith Lutheran, just south of the corner of Thousand Oaks and Jones-Maltzberger. Go to our website at sabsa.org for more details.
Information for creation events in our area are on our website's calendar page. For more information or to schedule a presentation, go to sabsa.org or call 210-599-7240. When you go to our website, you can click on a link to our newsletter. Our website has a link for contact information on which you can order our newsletter to be emailed to you, or you can call us. Also go to whyshouldyoubelieve.com. That is Terry's website containing articles looking at current day issues from a biblical perspective. SABSA meets the second Tuesday of each month at 7 p.m. We are now meeting at Faith Lutheran Church just south of the corner of Jones-Maltzberger and Thousand Oaks. There you will find biblical apologetics and creation science teaching found nowhere else in Bexar County, as well as the availability of books and videos on these important subjects. If you missed any part of this show, you can listen to the show anytime by going to the AM 630 KSLR, the Word in South Texas website. Click on KSLR Podcast, scroll down until you find Believing the Bible. Please join us again next Saturday for Believing the Bible. I'm Scott Lane, and for Terry Reed, Dr. Carl Williams, and Ed Salzwell, thanks for listening,
And we hope you found today a reason to believe the Bible.